Bienvenidas y bienvenidos
Welcome
a esta jornada de
to this
discusión sobre
discussion,
perspectivas críticas desde arte.
Mothering
Soy
Critical
Amanda de la
Perspectives
Garza,
from Art.
directora del
I'm
MUAC,
Amanda de la Garza, director of the
y
MUAC and the General
en
Director
estos
of
días
Audiovisuals.
tenemos la
In
oportunidad
these
de
days, we'll
conocer
have the
voces
opportunity to listen to multiple
progresistas y
voices of
activistas
artists,
sobre
writers,
nuevas formas de
activists
pensar la
regarding
maternidad.
new ways of
Esta
thinking about
jornada
mothering.
forma
This
parte del programa
discussion is
cultural
part of a
Discusión
parallel
Maternidad,
program of the
entretejen y
exhibition
torno en los actos de
Mothering
producción,
between the
actualmente
Stockholm
exhibida en el museo y es
syndrome
curados por el
and
enano desde
production.
Alejandra Labastida.
It's a project
Para
of
el MUAC, la exposición
Alejandra
ha
Lavacida. For the
permitido
MUAC,
conversación y discusión
this
inéditas para
exhibition has opened
voces
a
en México y en
discussion
América Latina. Desde
in
mi
Mexico and Latin
perspectiva,
America. From my point of view,
lucha por
it
atender y
represents a
situar la
drive
agenda
to
feminista y de
incorporate a
género
feminist
en
and
las
gender
instituciones culturales.
agenda into
Gracias al
cultural
esfuerzo de muchas
institutions.
mujeres
And it's thanks
artistas,
to the efforts
curadoras,
of
activistas e
women
investigadoras
artists,
esta exposición se
curators,
convierte
researchers that
en
this is
jornada de
possible.
reflexión
This
y de
exhibition and this
reflexión
discussion invites us to think of a different
internacional
horizon from the one we
en que la
experience today,
maternidad
where mothering
pueda ser vista como
can
una
be seen
responsabilidad de orden
as
colectivo.
a collective
El
responsibility,
avanzamiento
where
en los avances en
paradoxically we can
materia de
see
género requieren
advances in
muchas
gender
formas y
as a result of feminist struggle
institucional
and an
y por el otro
institutional
lado la
transformation, and on the
exacerbación
other
de la
hand,
violencia
an
contra las
exacerbation of
mujeres.
violence against
Los
women.
museos en este sentido
Museums, in
no
that
nos
sense,
podemos callar
cannot
ante esto.
remain
Nuestra
silent in this
responsabilidad es
situation.
educar para
Our
la
responsibility is
visibilización,
to
conversación,
visibilize,
discusión y
create a
construcción
spaces
colectivas.
for discussion, to
Al
create a
mismo
public
tiempo,
agenda,
colaborar en la
at the same
construcción de
time
una nueva
as
perspectiva de la
contribute
historia
to a
del arte.
different canon
Quisiera en este
of the history
sentido
of art. In this
reconocer
sense, I would like to
a nuestros
appreciate
cómplices y
our
cómplices en esta
accomplices
jornada,
in
tanto
this
Alejandra, Elena,
discussion, Alejandra, Elena, all the
la
participants,
doctora Angélica
as well
Velázquez,
as Angelica
internacional,
Velasquez,
directora
who's
del
with us,
Instituto de
director of
Investigaciones
the
Estéticas, y a
Institute of
Melissa
Aesthetic
Frishani,
Research,
directora
and
de SWOP de la
Dr.
Universidad de Witwatersrand.
Frishani
Lo mismo que quisiera
Naido.
agradecer el
I would
apoyo
also
del
like to
Centro Cultural
appreciate
de
the
España en
support from the
México y
Central
Brasil.
Cultural
Quisiera
Center of Spain and Mexico. Thank you for being with us.
en una
We will be
intensa
these
jornada
2 days in an intense
y cedo la
discussion,
palabra a
and I
nuestra
will give the
compañera
floor
Angélica
now
Velázquez.
to Angelica Velasquez.
Gracias, Amanda.
Thank
Buenos
you,
días
Amanda. Good
a
morning
todas, a
to
todos. Y
everybody.
bueno,
And
me
well,
hace muchísimo
it's a
que las
pleasure for me
investigaciones estéticas
that the
puedan
Center
participar
of
en esta
Aesthetic
jornada de
Research
discusión
can participate in this
sobre trabajos
discussion that
feministas
undoubtedly will be very
que ha sido
interesting
un tema
regarding a topic that is
nos
also
compete muchísimo a las mujeres que
compelling
escribimos
to us
cultura
as
de arte.
women. It's a topic
El
that,
catálogo ha sido
as
generalmente
is mentioned in the catalog,
importante
is
también por las voces y por las plumas también de los hombres.
it's
Y en
a
este
topic
sentido,
that
pues
men
hay
have
que
also
celebrar
addressed. In this
que
sense, we
ahora
have
las
to celebrate
mujeres
that now
y las
it's
mujeres
a
podemos
topic that
hablar
women can
abiertamente de
address
ellas y
directly,
cuestionar
to
directamente, ¿no?
question directly all
Bueno,
these
ya
issues.
Elizabeth Badinter,
Elizabeth
esta
Ballantyre,
filósofa francesa, ¿no? Ya
the French
planteaba esta
philosopher,
idea del instinto
disseminates
materno
this idea of the
en las mujeres
maternal
y
instinct in
subrayaba
women and
cómo
highlighted
este ejercicio de
how
la
this
maternidad
exercise of
amorosa
loving
y
mothering
también se había extendido
had
hacia los
extended throughout
occidentales y
Western
cómo esto había
societies.
sido el resultado
And as a
precisamente
result
de
of the
este
development of
revolucionario
capitalism and industrial revolution,
desarrollo de las
but
ideas
especially about the
personales
dissemination of illustrated
que
ideas
atribuyeron a las mujeres
that
esta
attributed to
responsabilidad
women
social
this
de
social
educar
responsibility
a
of
niños.
caring and
Y
educating
por
and
eso
bringing
en
children
el
up.
siglo XVIII se inició
Since
una
this
nueva
18th
historia
century, a new
patriarcal, ¿no?
history of
Totalmente
mothering
feminista,
emerged that
y es
is
el
still
mandato patriarcal de la
reaching
mujer
us, and this
entregada
patriarchal mandate
amorosa, así
of
como el
the
del amor
loving mother
incondicional y abnegado,
and
¿no?
the
Que emerge en los principios
unconditional,
del XIX
abnegated love of the mother that emerged in the
esta
19th
carga
and 20th
social
century. And the
de las
social
mujeres
role attributed to
que ha
women
conducido también, por
led
supuesto,
also,
al
of course,
encierro y el trabajo
to a
doméstico
closure
forzado,
and
¿no? Que es
within
el
the
trabajo también
domestic area and
doméstico
the
de las mujeres.
unpaid
Y un
work,
desafiante
domestic
factor,
work.
¿no? Era
And
la naturalidad de
to
esa
challenge
fuerza,
this role was
su
to
manera de
challenge
estar,
nature. It was
las
seen like that.
costumbres.
And that's the way the
Actualmente,
structures were formed.
el síndrome de
Mothering
Estocolmo y los actos de
among the
producción es una
Stockholm
exposición que hace justo a
syndrome
cuestionar
and
esto,
acts of
estas
production does
ideas
this,
construidas en
challenges the
patriarjes, en las bases
patriarchal
fundadas en
structures
prejuicios
on
y en
which
los
this
índices de
exercise has
lógica.
been sustained. This
Elena
concept of
Chávez y
mothering,
Alejandra
Elena
Labastida
Chavez and Alejandra
ya
Lavacina
nos muestran
have
desde dónde
reflected
todos
and dismounted all these notions, all these concepts that we have inherited, and take us to transgress these patriarchal mandates through art. Undoubtedly, this discussion that has been sponsored by MWAC and the Institute of Aesthetic Research will discuss and reflect in a critical way about all these notions, all these concepts. Well, the best of successes in these discussions, and I'm sure will be very productive and highly interesting as well. Thank you. I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Haddo.
Thank you again for being part of this conversation.
Thank you. Good evening from Johannesburg and buenos dias. We're far away from each other, but I'm very happy to be here even in this way. And I just want to start by saying a very big thank you first for inviting the Society Work and Politics Institute to co-host with you and myself for allowing me to participate in this set of conversations. And a special congratulations and thank you to Alejandra and Helena for what I think is, I'm sorry I can't be there with you and haven't been able to be physically present in the exhibition, but for what I, from the catalog and the website, see as a really beautiful, moving and important exhibition. In which I think each individual work is important, but I think that overall also shows the importance of curation, both in terms of politics, but I think also for the reimagination of pedagogies and methodologies, particularly of research. And you might be wondering why an institute called the Society Work and Politics Institute that's coming from a social sciences tradition, although we are in the humanities, is here today. But I think what we see important in this collaboration is that, in the social sciences, we've been faced with limits of our own traditions, particularly in terms of methodologies and pedagogies that constrain us in terms of thinking about alternatives to the existing state of things. And art has allowed us, because we have been trying over the last 5 years to move away from these practices that are situated and move from the position of certainty and predictability. And art has allowed us to critique ourselves, to see the world in different ways, to sense it in different ways. And Helena has been really central in the work that we're trying to do at SWAP. And together we've been shaping a project that's currently housed at SWAP called NAWAC, that's framed by the idea and the aim of decolonizing practices of knowledge production. And from these two places that are so far away from each other physically, Mexico and South Africa, we're trying to read together, think together, produce together in common about questions that come from two very different experiences of colonialism and colonization, but that are allowing us to produce new ideas, new thought. And both Alejandra and Helena and this exhibition have been contributing to a reading group that we've been having over the last 2 years that's centered around questions of time in relation to politics, work, and care. And some of the works in the exhibition have been brought into that reading group. So Maggie Nelson, who we'll be talking to, Claire Fontaine, for example, we've been reading together. And from that, we've contributed to a school last year, the Summer School in San Rafael, Veracruz, and we're also now producing a publication and going forward with further online collaboration. And I just want to say thank you for that. And I hope that the ongoing conversations that we have here will also continue further in what Helena, drawing from Maggie Nelson used to describe our collaboration last year in Veracruz as a blaze in care and friendship. So thank you. And yeah, I look forward to the next 2 days of us together, being together.
Thank you so much, Prashani and Angélica. Y ahora me gustaría darles la palabra a Alejandra y Elena, que pues...
Now I'd like to give the floor to Alejandra and Elena, who will start these conversations, talking about this project on which they've been working for many years, that challenged the museum and also faced the challenge of a pandemic. So the exhibition will be here until the end of July this year. Thank you very much. Can you help me with the presentation? We're going to take a few seconds so that all those who cannot see the exhibitions to tell you a little bit about what this project is all about, where it emerged from, and what we're doing with it. So while we're talking about this, you'll be seeing images of the exhibition itself. Well, between 2015 and 2016, Alejandra and I became mothers. She first, and then followed by me. And the world collapsed for us because we were not fulfilling the social and labor or personal mandates. And we realized that mothering had a secret that nobody had told us about. We had heard about the difficulties of pregnancy, the lack of sleeping, and the patience required, but we'd never been told that is a rupture, that it also houses a darkness that we didn't know about. In those days, Alejandra told me, and I quote her, "This baby has kidnapped me. I'm not an owner of my life, of my body, but I love it infinitely." Mothering is a syndrome of Stockholm with time, and this is part of the catalogue of the exhibition. She tells us how, with feminist literature, she became aware that the kidnapper was not the baby, but the capitalist system that nourishes from this unpaid work that is disguised as love. With these revelations, we started to ask why there is this secret pact. We asked, where are the voices that were warning us about these dangers? We started to exchange books, the Argonauts of Maggie Nelson, a text about love, the queer radicalness of pregnancy, the complex connection between giving life and giving life, gender divisions and carrying, and the possibility of transgressing and transitioning, and thinking beyond the productive and reproductive as acts of production. And also in those months, we received the text of Racing the Rising by Claire Fontaine. And this opened up a whole vision to us. This proposal of a new pact between genders has to be based on a new sentimental education that allows us to retrieve love and freedom as emancipatory forms. Actions was as a recognition of the creativity of women beyond reproductive work and beyond the narrative of romantic love, where the energies of pleasures that are not renewable can be recharged, reinvented, cared for. In her text, she proposes mothering outside of the reproductive cycle as an activity, a creative activity. In this, she sets forth that there's a capacity of seeing love in a different way, in a non-capitalist way, mothering as a vital form of feminism. These texts allowed us to understand that the importance of breaking away from this secret pact was politically imperative. In a certain moment, one of us or the other or both of us wondered how we could make what we had found public, how we could participate in breaking with this secret pact. What was within our reach was the field of contemporary art. So it was necessary to trace what is happening in this field, to do research, what is being produced, who was producing, what issues were being faced, what materialities, what affects and sensations were being generated. We started to look for references in books and texts, and this led us here, there, and everywhere. And we came into contact with friends and colleagues in different places of the world to tell us that we were looking for artists working with mothering. From another perspective, we were shared with files, contacts, work. So two things became evident. On one hand, if we didn't want to perpetuate this silent pact regarding this Stockholm syndrome, not only personally speaking, but as a civilization, as Claire Fontaine says, we needed to open up spaces to share this, to discuss this, and to discuss it collectively. And on the other hand, the tool that we had to do this was to curate an exhibition. We proposed this project to MWAC, and the MWAC gave us institutional support to generate a critical and challenging stance with the freedom of having work that did not celebrate mothering, but that they would raise issues of the challenges that we face in our times. The exhibition is composed by more than 47 works. I wouldn't be able to present each one of them. For those of you who haven't been able to visit the exhibition, I can summarize it as follows. You can hear women's voices in Spanish and English, Tzotzil, Russian, Finnish. There are many voices, soft voices, others yell. Some of them are seductive, hypnotize, others break down. You can also hear the music of Eric Saphir and the silence and the crying of a kid. You can hear milk dripping from a breast. You can see strong and happy women, other women who are broken and tired, empty bodies, gestating bodies, bodies that are dismembering into thousands of fragments. Others who refuse to house more life. There's sadness, there's joy, euphoria. Times are challenging. Past and future come together. You can smell parsley in this exhibition. For us, it was important to understand what was being produced. That's why it's a production that is a very contemporary exhibition. It was also important to expand to different places, to understand the different circumstances that were experiences, and to explore the different traditions, artistic traditions. We refrain to the 21st century, so it would be a reflection about our times. These are works that refer to different situations: state violence, fertility, economy, work division, mental diseases, the relationship between life and death, and feminisms and other topics. Rather than pointing to one single narrative, each work is a universe in itself. They're interconnected, but they do not aim to have a totalizing narrative. Undoubtedly, it's a feminist exhibition in the sense that it is a critical reading from a gender point of view. Although the work is mainly carried out by women, most of them mothers, although not only, we also search for an expansion of women to include non-binary, non-binary people, and transgender. There's also collaboration with men. This was important for us because part of the challenge of the exhibition is to expose and criticize gender perspectives. So we wanted to talk about mothering and not motherhood. We wanted to open up the word to the action of sustaining life, an action that can be carried out beyond gender. The word, verb, mothering in English, refers to the act of caring for children or people, but doesn't define the action, whereas as a noun in Spanish refers to the state of quality of being mothers, and as the dictionary says, is a woman that has exercised as a mother. The word mothering in Spanish doesn't appear, but its use in Spanish has been used in the last decade because of the need to point to the, not the gender aspect, but the caring aspect. Although Academy doesn't recognize this word, it's being introduced into our language as a way of thinking of a different kind of relationship in the world, using this word mothering does not want to reduce the radicality of these experiences of women. In this sense, it is a double operation. On one hand, we denounce the violence that we're subjected as women and the demand for reproductive and social, political, and economic rights of the current feminist agenda, and to construct narratives, language, imaginaries that are inclusive and intersectional in order to dismount gender and its subdivisions that generate this unprecedented violence. The threads that we wove are part of much more complex networks that politicize the caring work from many different fronts. And we wanted to appreciate the generosity of all the people that helped us to step into this realm. And all those that have visited the exhibition have shared in different ways in which the work has allowed them to open up readings and discussions of their role as mothers and fathers or children that allows them to question what human reproduction implies today. Academia made the pandemic made inequality more apparent. We're aware that this is a problem that affects all of us as society, and not only the polybodies that gestate and take care. There will not be better conditions of life so long as we don't have better distribution of caring and labor. This is another part of this effort. We want to appreciate Mark, the Institute of Aesthetic and Swap, for making this possible, and we hope that this allows us to open more pathways to continue thinking together. I meant to make use of this to remind you that the exhibition will be open until July the 3rd, and the publication can be downloaded free of charge from the MWAC's website, and we hope that you accompany us throughout these days. Thank you very much to all of you who are with us in this inauguration. And it's in 4 minutes' time, we will continue with the first activity of this discussion, which is a discussion table between Julieta Aranda, Carmen Huina, moderated by Don't Disconnect. We will have activities all day today and tomorrow from 10 o'clock onwards with the keynote conference of Fontaine and other discussion tables and the performance of Maria Lopez at 5 o'clock sharp at MWAC. We hope it's an excellent discussion and see you very soon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this.
Hola.
Alejandra and Elena, congratulations on such an amazing, important show that touched me personally very much. I am very excited to be in conversation here with Julieta, Carmen, and Irene about something that concerns us very much, which is maternity. And I want to start with bringing up one of the pieces in the show. It's an embroidered piece by Paulina Leon, in which she takes up one of the slogans from the feminist marches since 2016, which have been happening across Latin America. And it says, "Punk is not dead, it's the moms." And another slogan that we see repeatedly again and again in the marches is, "I am the artist, not the muse." And I think that you guys' work and the exhibition in general is in between these two slogans or mandates for feminism today. So I'm going to give an introduction and then let you guys talk a bit about the works you have in the show. So when we think of ourselves as creators, of course, we don't want to be part of a niche. And I think that happened to feminists in the 80s and 90s. We don't want to be artists who are mothers, who wants to be defined by a role we play in someone's life. Yet as creators concerned with reproduction, we are the vanguard, shattering creation, the modern Western heteropatriarchal fantasy or myth of individuality. We are working with the essence with what it means to be human, which has been denied by capitalism and colonialism as well, interdependency. The fantasy of individuality and the denial of interdependency are at the root of our current Anthropocene crisis. Embracing interdependency and reproductive work as the center of human and inhuman lives means moving toward a new sense of post-human subjectivity, a new understanding of the human as parting from the interrelational and affective positions of humans and our interdependency from our environment, recognizing that we are structurally connected to one another and rely on each other and on other multiple non-human systems in order to thrive. A concern with reproduction means embracing the fact that no living organism can exist on our own, that we live interconnected and in symbiosis with our environment. So the problem is that mothering has been hijacked by heteropatriarchy. And this is why Elena and Alejandra have compared contemporary mothering to Stockholm Syndrome, the survival strategy in which a kidnapped person ends up identifying ideologically and affectively with the kidnapper. In the case of mothering, the kidnapper is the system that determines the must, the obligations of maternity, and even that maternity still is an obligation for women. But sometimes the kidnapper is also the subject of reproduction herself, with her demands and needs making it impossible for mothers to fully function in the productive realm. So indeed, second wave feminists gave themselves the task to fight for reproduction rights, contraceptives, abortion, and choosing being mothers, but also for working outside of the home and be able to do other things aside reproductive labor. Work became a matter of presence in social space that remains, however, at conflict with mothering. Even in societies in which reproduction is a priority and legislation is in favor of women, mothering gets complicated. For most cases, we have to invest sometimes even our whole salaries to pay for childcare to be able to work. Creation in particular is in conflict with mothering. Tracy Emin said getting pregnant was a kiss of death. Marina Abramovich stated that you can't be an artist and a mother. Women creators have complained of being denied jobs or opportunities for having or wanting a child. Lina Meruane's diatribe against having children concludes that it is impossible to be a creator and the mother because you need a job to pay for childcare and another one to pay to create. So you need 2 jobs on top of reproductive duties. These questions are asked by Carmen Winant in her work, Why are these our only alternatives, and what kind of struggles will move us beyond them? Her installation is based on printing Silvia Federici's papers on top of her children's artworks. Her gesture brings to the fore the Italian feminist movement from the 1970s, wages for housework, which demanded fair pay for reproductive work from society, shedding light on this form of invisibilized, unrecognized, and denigrated work women do for free. The gesture of the inscription of children's drawings onto Federici's archive visibilizes the material and temporal aspects of mothering. Children scribbling while their mom reads or tries to read about reproduction, and I can fully relate to that. Part of the problem is that as mothering has been kidnapped by heteropatriarchy, is first and foremost a matter of the symbolic. Under heteropatriarchy, mothers only exist to procreate, to raise and feed the subject of reproduction. As a woman creator, I am already outside of my place. In contrast, prevails the myth of the man who engenders artworks or books in the womb of his genius, fed by years of references and the brilliance of his mind, and whose life is managed by an army of female assistants. So it gets more complicated for us, mothers who are creators, when we consider that in the cultural field, women are still expected to perform reproductive roles as producers, translators, administrators, curators, organizers. More than creators, we are considered the guardians of culture, as we are expected to upkeep the social patriarchal contract. Mothering can also feel like Stockholm syndrome because we are well aware that in becoming mothers, we have fulfilled our social role under heteropatriarchy. This is why we resist against identifying as mothers. Julieta, who has opened up a conversation around artist mothers who does not make work about maternity, but I'm sure she will tell us about how mothering has carved the notion of politicized subjectivity that traverses her work and more. We also resist against forms of maternity or being a mother imposed by heteropatriarchy. These impositions are beautifully documented by Irene Lustig's film, The Motherhood Archives, in which she presents an archive of giving birth in the 20th century as it was reconfigured by the male gaze, which conceived the female maternal body as a site of institutional control, surveillance, and state intervention. So across a century, we see how birth oscillates between being both natural and pathological. Pathological because of labor pains. Is pain a biological side effect or of upright anatomy or a punishment by God? Is it wrong to meddle with the pain if it is willed by God? And in this society, we also consider pain and suffering as abnormal. And heteropatriarchy feeds also on maternal suffering. So part of our fight is to transform it into rethinking about our crisis of relationality, lack of shared meanings, and looking for ways of creating stable interdependent networks based on solidarity. Resisting the hijacking of maternity means reconfiguring creation beyond procreation and reproduction, building a shared space for joyful, healing forms of care toward a new post-human future. So in my utopian crazy vision, I envision a society in which productive labor is rejected and everybody in that society does reproductive work. So that's where I'm gonna leave it. And pass the mic to Julieta. Do you want to start?
I'm happy to start. So, okay. So first off, I don't have work on this exhibition because we started talking about it and then COVID hit. And I all of a sudden was faced with 24/7 childcare. I have a 6-year-old child. I was like, I cannot, I had to all of a sudden be, okay, I am not going to make any work for the next, I don't know how long. So I didn't even try. It was just not possible. Which, I mean, it has been a challenging 2 years in many ways. And it has made me think a lot, like what has happened from the beginning of the conversation and end of 2019 to now, which we are in April 2022. Many things have happened. And motherhood is interesting to me because it's something that, I mean, I think of mothering, I don't want to think of it as labor. And that's something, so I know Federici's work. I like Wages for Housework. It's an incredibly important text. And I still don't want to think about that as labor because it's a bit of a trap. And what I mean by that is that I don't want to think as mothering as a gendered role that is performed by one person. I think that mothering is a collective endeavor. It's like a stone soup where it takes a, you know, like there are these old sayings, it takes a village to raise a child. Absolutely, it takes a village. So, and that is a social contract. And nobody gets enslaved by it. And so, and it should be a distributed endeavor, right? That allows us to, I mean, to perform our lives and not be defined by the fact that we chose to reproduce. I chose to have a child. It's probably like the most the radical thing I have ever done. I'm a single mom by choice. I had a child by way of assisted reproductive technologies. And of course, people were asking me, like, why are you doing this to yourself? You know, like, why are you going to work again? Are you going to show? And I kept thinking that just like the fact that that we are supposed to choose, you know, I want to, like, if I could, I would have 7 kids with 7 different husbands, and they would all be taking care of my children, and I would be traveling the world showing my work in museums. Now, that's not going to happen because I'm already past the age where I could have another 6 kids. But still, I want to imagine that I mean, like, I think that one of the reasons why I chose to have a child is because of thinking about the kind of world I want to inhabit, that I don't want, the world I want to produce. I don't want to theorize about the world. I want to make that world happen. And a lot of the fact of, you know, like making and so on is, it's a fantastic idea, but I want to make intergenerational kinship. Nobody actually, when it comes to children, people revert to incredibly narrow heteronormative models of being. So the only way to actually interact with children in the way I wanted was to make my own kid, which I did, and I don't have any family anywhere. So I've been actually trying to practice this model of letting all my friends that didn't have kids because they didn't have any money, sort of partake in this kind of stone soup model. We are all the family of this particular person. And I mean, like that said, you know, like I still, you know, like it's a lot of work, but I don't want to think of it about labor. I mean, when I think about productive and, you know, productive, reproductive, non-productive labor. Like, I mean, like reproduce, I can think about productive and non-productive labor, but reproductive labor, I just want to distribute. I would like that to be as a bit of like, as Irmgard was talking of, kind of like utopian situation where it's all, where everybody gets to do a part of it. It should be part of the social contract. I was going to talk about economies of like reproductive economies and trying to make it part of the social contract is important to me when I think about the kinds of economies that we use, but that we have. You know, we have like extractive economies, and we also have reproductive economies. And it is no accident that the reproductive economy, at least in English, it has a very particular name. The name of it is husbandry. And how come that, like anything that has to do with the reproduction of animals and plants and so on, it's actually the domain of the men? like of the male head of the household, whatever. So I was like trying to build something around that, but then what happened is that as I was building something for to this purpose, the war between Russia and Ukraine started, and I am in Berlin, and I am seeing the refugees come. And what happened is that I've been involved in refugee work since 2015. So we were trying to get, we reactivated refugee work networks. And we started talking and we said, okay, what we need to do, and this was really sad, what we needed to do first was to try to get out of Ukraine teenager boys, because we knew that the law that made it so that men could not leave the country was going to pass. So we activated networks and we managed to get out of Ukraine 13, 17 and 18-year-old boys. And it's a really sad small number. But then as I see what happens in the central station, which is like the tons, families, which are all composed of women and children, grandmother, mother, 3 children, mother, aunt, 2 kids, because all the men have to stay and fight. It's a really sad, like an incredibly sad show of both like a toxic heteronormativity, where families and constructs and effective networks are being ripped apart, and also a point of and then I'm thinking about that also in light of Ukraine being one of the places that is the most active in terms of surrogacy, of like producing mothers, and now there are even more mothers being produced, and like even surrogate mothers that could not, whose kids were all of a sudden not taken by the purported fathers or parents, sorry. And I guess I was thinking about extractive and reproductive labor, but all of a sudden with the war coming, and I will close with this, what I started thinking is about unproductive labor, right? Like the war, the labor and the war that produces nothing. And that to me was the labor of war. Like there is like so much work being put into it. There are soldiers, there are tanks, there is like entire factories, that put in operation to produce nothing. I mean, like to produce the destruction of the world. And that's a kind of like what became to me like the antithesis of what a reproductive economy is. And I mean, it's just been a very strange time of like trying to work with a lot of mothers that chose not, that did not choose this very fragile position. And I guess it's time to hand off the mic to somebody else. So I'll leave it at this.
Thank you, Julieta. I was thinking that maybe under this particular absolute capitalist society, reproductive labor is extracted forcefully from the bodies and energies of women, no? So reproduction is operating under the logic of extractivism, maybe?
I mean, it's coerced, but it doesn't have to be, No, of course not. No. It doesn't have to be. Like I reproduced thoughtfully, willingly, without, I was feeling like the Virgin Mary when I had a kid. I was like, like there is like no, there was a moment when a nurse walked into my hospital room, and because all my friends came over, and she was like, "Who is the dad?" All my friends, we were drinking because I had not been able to drink for months, so we were like all pretty drunk, and everybody turned around and said like, "We are." And that is, I mean, like that was like the moment where it's like, okay, that's exactly what I want. that I don't want to be saddled with being like the only person that bears that responsibility. I want it distributed.
Yeah. Your utopia reminds me of a lot of Marge Piercy's Women at the Edge of Time, the sci-fi novel she wrote in the early 80s, I think, where reproduction is effectively separated from the mother, like the body that carries the child. I don't think even the children that are carried by anybody, they're produced in machines, and they are effectively collectively raised.
But I love being pregnant. I adored my pregnancy. It was fantastic. So I would not want to, I still think that there is something about experiencing that. I don't just want to produce society. I mean, there is like an individual rite of passage there, which is important, and there is like a double bind there. Yeah, like the position that women occupy, like mothers, is the same as the creator occupies. That you don't, as an artist, you don't need to get paid because you are creating something, so there is your payment. As a mother, you don't need to get paid. Of course you won't get paid because you do it for love, because it's your child.
Right.
So I find those positions oddly similar.
But I think we've gotten to a point where we're not only not getting paid, but the conditions for mothering are getting extremely more and more difficult. No, in societies where the social welfare system has imploded and so on, the conditions in which many women are exercising maternity, for example, the war, is just getting more and more difficult. So nobody's even getting, or a lot of people are not even granted the minimum conditions to exercise maternity in a dignified way.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. And of course, you still have people that are from whom motherhood is demanded. I don't know if, in all honesty, if knowing about war and pandemics, I don't know if I would have taken the decisions that I took, because my contingencies were placed in an entire different register. But still, I find this the most challenging moment, also because, and I think this really is the last thing I say, I have been working with science fiction for the last 15 years, and with temporalities that involve the future very much. And as I have been raising a child, my temporalities changed. And I realized that I don't want to dream about hypothetical futures that have no relationship with my present. I want to put a moratorium in science fiction and to think what I want now is to really get involved in the difficult and amazing work of producing the present, of producing the livable presence, because without many livable presents, there is no future.
Moms are the punk. Moms are the punk creating the future.
Yes, but we need to create this livable, fantastic, amazing, joyful presence. Yeah. If we want those utopias, these futures to exist, we need to make those presents. And just to switch my temporality that hardcore and to say, I'm not doing science fiction anymore. Or I'm leaving that for Silicon Valley that's pumping a ton of money into producing hypotheses of what the future could bring. Now I want to really focus myself on doing as many presents and making as many presents as I can make, as an artist, as a mother, as a person, as everything.
Great. Let's switch the mic to Carmen. Thank you, Julieta.
Welcome.
Me too. I want to create presence with you. Cool.
Should I jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Julieta. That was so much of what you talked about, created some sort of space or channel for what I'm going to share today. I have some slides. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and then I'll sort of use them to animate the ideas and the process of making this work. And before I do that, I want to extend a particular thank you to Alejandra and Elena for not only inviting me in on this ambitious, incredibly timely and sensitive exhibition project, but for having so many conversations with me, particularly over the course of those early months as I was trying to sort out what it was that I wanted to make. And yeah, your sort of patience and intelligence was really instrumental. And I think of you in that sense as collaborators on this project. Okay. So I'm going to start with a short video that I made 2 years ago of my older son, who's now 6. He was 4 in this video in my studio. It's just about 1.5 minutes.
Carla, what do you think of my studio? There you have it. What are the rules of being in Mama's studio, though? What are the rules?
Stop that. Dark.
Do you like being in here?
Only if I could reach that button to put it off.
Yeah, that would make it better.
Can I do it?
Funny things?
No, I don't see anything, but I am only fun. Close that door because your paintings are moving. That one.
What about that one?
Oh, and this one. Oh, and this one. Oh, and this.
Don't step on that one, please.
Don't.
Oh, Carlo, don't step on that.
Hey, off of the
Okay, I thought that was a sort of a nice way to start as a demonstration of all the things that we do at home. And I'm at home now. You're probably going to hear my dog barking in the background. My studio, as you might have been able to tell, is in my house. And so I set that up initially when my children were very small, so that when they slept, I could work. And, when I wasn't sort of too exhausted out of my mind. But of course, now that they're older, that means that they wander into the studio and they walk on the artwork and they, it's sort of like a playground for them, for better or worse, sort of as illustrated by that last moment in which he's like using the rulers as a kind of bridge over the lava. I try to sort of hold that up, those moments in which, how can I say, there's never a time in which being a parent and a mother is not sort of in direct competition with my time, with my studio life. And on the sort of other side of that, and in my sort of better days, I think often about how I can absorb that very same frustration or sort of potential or, the promise of being a parent into the work itself, sort of as part of the larger project for all of the struggles that brings, many of them of which have already been mentioned. So I'm going to try to move quickly because I have a lot of slides. These are my sons, Carlo and Rafa. This is last week, painting rocks. And I wanted to offer a little bit of sort of context here. This is a project that I made a few years ago, 2018, a book, an installation. This is the book version called My Birth, which contends quite literally with my birth, as you can see in this image here, images of my mother giving birth to me, and found images of women and people going through that sort of similar trajectory. So I've long been interested in labor in all of its forms, reproductive labor, sort of the labor of the studio and the point in which those two come to meet. I didn't come to learn about wages for housework, embarrassingly, until I was in my late 20s, early 30s, around the time that I became pregnant for the first time. And this is the very famous pamphlet, which came out, I believe, in maybe even it says, I think like 70, I want to say between 76 and 78, which begins, of course, with the lines, the infamous lines. They say it is love, we say it is unwaged work. And I have to say, because I think I discovered this, I mean, I was always like an ardent feminist, and my feminism really sort of aligns with a kind of radicalism that belongs in many ways to a generation before my own. And my own mothering and my politics are so tied in with that and with one another. But I didn't sort of come to discover this until the moment in which I really needed it most. And I mean, I think I wept when I first read those words, written almost 10 years before I was born. I was also really interested sort of not only in the movement for the movement for wages for housework, which, as has already been introduced, is and was a grassroots women sort of network and campaign that, as has already been said, championed recognition and payment for all the domestic work and care work that women do that goes unremunerated. I'm interested in that as a political concept, as an ideological concept, as an actionable concept. And I'm really particularly interested as an artist in that as a creative concept, both in terms of like what kind of creativity is required of us to invent worlds that don't exist, systems that are not yet in place, but also like, how do we represent a movement? And that's a really compelling question for me, again, as an artist, but as all those other things. So I've been looking to wages for housework for a long time for their visual strategies. And I often think about this in the States, in fact, the manner in which like the right wing has won or is winning a kind of war of visuality, the way that sort of they harness, I mean, the sort of easiest example of this is like their anti-abortion crusades. Sort of how they harness photography and weaponize photography. And so I'm interested in how left-wing movements and sort of coalition building aligns itself with visuality and representation. So as I was approaching in these conversations, as I mentioned, I had this idea of looking into, of sort of working with wages for housework. I wasn't sure how I would do it. I turned to the Pembroke Center at Brown, which was then working on, but had not yet made public, the papers of Silvia Federici. They have since been made public. So, this is just screenshots of what they look like for those of you who work in archives or interested in working in archives. There's no digitization of the material. You have to go there for that, but you at least have a sort of enumerated list and breakdown. Luckily for me, I know this is like inscrutable, but I was introduced to Arlen Austin, who has made this entire project possible. Arlen is a graduate student. He's like a social laborer and organizer, maybe first and foremost. He's also an artist. And he is a graduate student at Brown and an assistant and collaborator of Silvia Federici. And it just so happened that he had already digitized 80 to 90% of this material and shared it with me, out of curiosity, out of generosity, in the spirit, of like a kind of shared creative and feminist agenda. So the first thing that I did was print the material out, sort of just to see what it would look like. Of course, my studio is not big enough to encompass it. So I sort of did it in pieces, some are not sort of to scale, but just to kind of get a sense of what this might hold. And there was a kind of like, as we would say here, like a chicken and an egg problem. I wasn't sure whether I should print out the images in a nicer way and then have my children draw on those. That was my initial idea, as with this image on the right, or if I should take their drawings. And this is an example just that I pulled from this morning of my son sort of drawing on an existing image. So I thought that would be the way to go. And ultimately they were like horrified. They didn't want to touch these intact photographs. So we went the opposite route, where I hoarded their drawings and their sort of pieces of artwork, which of course they're producing constantly. They're 4 and 6 now. And I took those to the Columbus Center for Printed Arts. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm always trying to sort of collaborate and work with local folks. And I worked with one of the co-founders of this space, who, Elisa Smith, who is herself, she's pregnant again now for the second time, had a 1-year-old and was often helping me doing this work with sort of him, in the bassinet next to her. And we were just testing. It was just like the majority of the work was just testing. So like here we are trying to print on some sort of clear vellum. you know, on different materials. As I said, do we want sort of the drawing to come first? Do we want it to come after? So what I'm going to move through now is just like a series of close-ups of these piles and these printouts that we were making. Every single one was its own dedicated material experiment. So you can see here this sort of like nice thing happening with the crayon resist. You know, the wax crayon goes on first, and then it's watercolored or gouached over top. And then we printed on top of that. This is a glue stick with watercolor on top. So it was like a real, it was incredible range, you know, of sort of stickers and gold foil and every kind of, you know, material that I could pull out of my studio that the kids would be interested in using. And yeah, like I said, for the most part, we would then take those drawings and print on top of them. And there was so much collaboration between, as I said, not only between myself and the curators in conversation, but between, you know, me and Elisa, who was doing, you know, sort of technically doing the output here, which is, of course, in my mind, you know, the sort of the feminist way of working on a project that isn't a triangle, but a circle. So some other examples, I mean, the really weird shit happened in the printer. You know, these were stickers that my son had, dinosaur stickers where he'd put some sort of oil pastel on top of them, but very neatly. And then when it went through the printer, it sort of smeared it all around. So the way in which the technology was sort of working or misfiring was really effective. And, you know, needless to say, the messages, right? Hookers fight back. And then my son's dinosaur stickers and his illustrations for me are like, there's so many kind of like impossible, unexpected, inadvertent points of connection that point to the manner in which capitalism not only holds women down in a number of ways, but relies on women, right? It cannot function without our $1 billion of unpaid labor every year. I'm wrapping up here. I just have a few more images. Needless to say, there are, I mean, ultimately we printed, you know, thousands and narrowed it down because that was how many Arlen provided. You know, being sort of sensitive to kind of the range of their approaches too, as we went, as I mentioned earlier, and their sort of sensitivity to working with representation as a tool of radical struggle. This is after they were printed. I had to find a space to lay them out. I had to work on a floor in a gallery here in Columbus that let me borrow their space between shows so I could sort of make arrangements of and sort of try to wrap my head around the scale. Here's the piece up on the wall. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see it in person, but I'm so pleased to know that it's in the world and people are making contact with it. Some details, you know, it's like, it's so funky. I mean, pieces are falling off of it, like, because it's like my children's hands, you know, and they don't, you know, my 3-year-old was not applying his glue stick evenly. And so, you know, there's some like real faithfulness to that. And the last thing I wanted to end on is, you know, like the manner in which wages for housework has sort of like come back into vogue. And, you know, that's both troubling and terrific. You know, I feel like anytime anything becomes mainstreamed, it makes me feel nervous because, you know, it's like not only no longer radical, but it opens itself up to be consumed by capital. But, you know, it's something to sort of think about. This is a profile on Silvia Federici last year from the New York Times Magazine. A lot of people saw this piece. This is just a screen grab from the New York Times, did a piece in which I think probably undervalued, but women's unpaid labor, yearly unpaid labor at $1.5 trillion. And then the last thing that I wanted to point to, and definitely the most radical and sort of what I think of as the kind of passing of the torch was this book, but also these writers, Cinzia Ruza, Titi Bhattacharya and Nancy Fraser, who some of you may be familiar with, who I think of as being this sort of like new radical guard. And this book that they wrote published by Verso last year or the year before, which contends so much with the intersection of Marxism and feminism, but it's really about women's strikes, actually, and and the sort of the power, the necessary sort of power, utilized power of organized efforts. And I think of it as and sort of decentralizing, strictly Western agendas. And so I think of this book and these authors as being this sort of kind of heir apparents, or the sort of, not that, I mean, Silvia Federici is still with us and well and corresponded with me for this project, but, as the sort of new radical reckoning. So I don't know where I am with time. Am I more or less okay? Okay, so I'm gonna leave it there. I tend to wax sort of long, so I've tried to speed through it.
Carmen, thanks so much. I attest to the piece being it looks just gorgeous in the museum. It's the first thing you see when you walk into the show. And I was just thinking how in the piece, the temporalities of the feminist movement in the 70s overlaps with the everyday present of mothering. And I guess get goosebumps when I think about it. It's kind of like a question work, or a work that invites us to pose a question about where we are now. With respect to feminism in the 70s. And I think it also honors those women to whose struggle we all owe a lot to today. No, so it's a very moving piece.
Indeed. And that manifesto written by Federici in the mid to late 70s, I mean, it's like acrid. She's so angry, it's like it's really biting. And so for me to feel sort of seen by that, but also to relate it to, sort of the rearing of my children and their own relationship to creativity and production, and, sort of the care that I need to assert, sort of upon them in their work as they do so, felt like, at once sort of incredibly basic, and also hopefully like a complicated coming together.
Thanks, Carmen. I was very moved also because I didn't feel alone. Because I know exactly. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks. So now let's move on to Irene. Irene, I should tell you that in Mexico, 95% of births are C-sections now. And to be able for me to have a natural birth, I had to do it in Guatemala with a doula in her clinic, because I was too terrified to do it wherever a doctor would be because of the threat of the C-section. So please tell us more about your amazing film about the social, political, and disciplinary constructions of mothering and labor.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. This is really a pleasure to be part of this conversation. One of the most amazing screenings I've ever had, and this film, the Motherhood Archives, is from 2013, so it's older work. But actually one of my most amazing screenings was at Ambulante in Mexico City, and they invited all of these Mexican midwives, and everyone who showed up for the screening was like super invested in the birth community and politics in Mexico. And yeah, it was very moving to kind of place this film into a different kind of national context and have this conversation with women in a very different set of discourses and different set of options and different set of struggles. So let's see. So I also brought some slides, and I think how I might move through this. So I have an older child. I have a 15-year-old. And so I made about a decade of work that was very directly kind of work that came out of my experience mothering, including the film that's included in the museum show, the Motherhood Archives. And not only about mothering, but I think kind of thinking about this context that we're all talking about around labor and reproductive labor, really work made kind of through and from inside these incredible constraints of mothering. So not only is the work about motherhood, but it's work that I made, at home in my living room with archival and found footage, or kind of gathering things on the internet, right? So work that I could really make from inside this very constrained space of what was possible. And I haven't made work about motherhood in a few years, and my child is older, and some of that sense of like freedom and having my own time has come back, which is amazing and really beautiful. But I do still really feel like the experience of motherhood and of making this body of work has really turned my work inside out, and I think really reformed me as a new kind of, I'm primarily a filmmaker, but I kind of moved between more visual art, but mostly long form nonfiction film. But I think has really remade me as a new kind of filmmaker, where even when I'm making work that's not at all about motherhood or even not about women, the project I'm working on now is like about conservative white men in Eastern Washington State. But I think the ways that I've come to think about a practice that is listening centered, that is collaborative, that's interested in community, just kind of all of the things and ways of working that I've come to value, I think have really been formed by all of the experiences I had, both making and also trying to show work about motherhood, which hasn't come up yet, but it was super difficult for me to get any of this work shown initially. And I think it is still, it's not, I think you started by saying that motherhood or feminist art used to be niche art, but I think it's still very, very niche work for a lot of curators and film programmers. Like there are kind of moments that are like this kind of gathering and show and other shows that I've been a part of. But I think overall in the art world, it's still treated as a kind of marginal and quite invisible topic. So maybe I'll just show a few slides. And I think what I wanted to do is just chart a bit of a roadmap of both the project that's in the show, but then a few other projects that I made around the same time that are just thinking in different ways about archiving motherhood, thinking historically about maternity and birth, but also thinking about community and kind of ways of making bigger conversations that extend beyond my own experience. I think one of the things that a lot of new mothers experience is this tremendous isolation of, being at home, being alone, being kind of removed from communities and contexts that used to feel important and sustaining. And I think a lot of my work has been in different ways trying to remap or remake new kinds of communities and ways of making conversation and inviting people to share and feel listened to, and also talk about things that are difficult and hard and maybe like socially discouraged to share about, like bad feelings about motherhood or ambivalent feelings about motherhood. So yeah, I think a lot of the work has been trying to do that, and that's work that I've continued to do in other projects. And also I think in conversation with Carmen's work, a lot of my work has also reached back to the 70s and 70s feminism for thinking about filmmaking strategies, collective structures, political strategies, and kind of ways of thinking about how to build conversation spaces that are in dialogue with the 70s, but also kind of more expansive and relevant to the moment we're in now. So maybe I'll just share my screen and move through a few things. Just, can everyone see? Let me. I can't see everyone anymore. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Is there a gray box on it? Sometimes there's a gray box. No, okay. Okay. So this is what I write when I became pregnant, during my pregnancy and after having a baby. I think like many people, I was really kind of lost about how to kind of come back to a sense of having a practice and making work and what to do. So one of the things I started to do was just to order discarded childbirth and maternal education films on eBay. And while I was pregnant, I think for me, this was kind of a way of making a prenatal education curriculum in my own kind of weird way. I think I'm someone who always wants to think historically. And when I'm thinking about something that feels complicated and fraught, and like I don't understand I think it was clear to me even while I was pregnant that there's all of these pressures and ideologies and ideas about the right way to do things. What is a successful mother? What is a bad mother? What's a good birth? What's a bad birth? So I think I felt kind of very just not sure how to navigate those questions, but also very curious about kind of how those questions were formed historically. So I just started buying all these different films, a lot of films for women from kind of 1919 onto the present, kind of teaching women how to successfully mother or successfully give birth, but also looking at a lot of medical films that are training films for doctors that are actually quite different, that are not at all about how to be a successful mother, but are about how to successfully like manipulate a woman's body. And also collecting a lot. And I think I was really just collecting. I'm kind of somebody who gathers stuff, and then a project kind of forms in the process of gathering lots of stuff. So I was also getting all of these like baby books that were discarded on eBay, kind of books, manuals, books where people were kind of recording information about their babies, kind of instruction manuals of different kinds. And just really trying to think about all of these different lineages of just how we've come to hold the kind of social ideas and constructs that we have about all of these things. So these are just some images of some of the different films and materials that I gathered. I think I had like 100 films, so a pretty big kind of archive of my own. And eventually I started going to real archives and real libraries and kind of expanding that collection. And then at the same time, like Carmen, I was really kind of discovering the 70s as this kind of moment in feminist history that was really speaking to me and very moving to me, and felt like it was really offering this model of kind of women in community sharing that I found very absent in my own life at the time. So I spent a lot of time thinking and reading about consciousness raising groups, which maybe you all already know this term, but right in the 70s, there were these kind of very small scale gatherings of women who didn't necessarily know each other, but maybe were neighbors or maybe kind of lived near each other. And the format of these groups was for women in turn to just share about their own lives and experiences. But with this kind of much bigger political goal, where the idea is that through this kind of personal sharing, it's not simply like unburdening yourself or therapeutic, but it's actually creating a space where kind of larger structures of oppression can be identified through women recognizing and seeing each other and understanding that they're kind of oppressed by common oppressions. So I spent a lot of time, thinking about these groups, watching. There's a big body of 1970s US collectively made documentary work that had never been shown to me in my film education, but that's work that was made collectively and using the consciousness raising group as a space for exploring different kinds of issues. So I was watching all these films. And then eventually, while I had a baby, kind of going out and trying to remake these kinds of conversations in different ways. And some of those conversations found their way into the Motherhood Archives, and some of them landed in other places. But I was kind of putting up flyers and Craigslist ads and trying to stage conversations in different ways. So one thing I was doing was making these kind of 11-minute long take conversations with women who had a range of relationships to motherhood, some new mothers, but actually like a big range of mothers of adult children, kind of all kinds of women with different sets of relationships to mothering, and just inviting them to speak uninterrupted for 11 minutes and filming these really long take 16mm conversations. So these are just a few of those, and there 3 of these conversations are in the film. But for me, it was just a process for a while of, again, just gathering and exploring and seeing what might be generated in doing these kinds of listening processes. And then this was a different shoot where I kind of tried to restage a consciousness raising group and gathered a number of women together to have a conversation, which also is not part of the film, but was part of this process, trying to think through how to use these kind of structures and strategies from the 70s. Another project I worked on around the same time called the Worry Box Project. This was actually the first project I was able to do after my son was born. It's a web-based project. It's down right now, you can't see it because coded in Flash. So we're in the process of trying to recode it now that Flash is dead. But the project was that I was inviting strangers to share maternal anxieties with me, either anxiety dreams or waking anxiety. And I would hand transcribe the anxieties that people shared and create a video for each anxiety, and then and actually make a physical paper and put it in this box that was this kind of collective archive of maternal anxieties. So these are some of those. And this project for me, this was all I could do when my son was born. It's very repetitive. It's this kind of durational project, basically just doing, I was just writing these worries over and over again for like, an hour a day while my son was asleep. But for a while, this felt like my only point of contact to having an actual creative process. This was making these worry videos of where I was kind of ingesting and spending time with and processing, and then making the small thing with someone else's anxiety or worry. But also a way of making a kind of conversation space and a space that could feel safe to women to say things that might feel unsafe to say in other kinds of social contexts or settings. And this is just an installation view of the worry box project. Here's the actual box with people's worries inside. And then let me just show, let me go backward. Let me go backwards. This is just the trailer for the film. So it's just 1 minute and it'll give you a sense of what those materials look like.
This is the record of the labor of a woman between 30 and 35 years of age, having her first baby. We cannot, of course, reproduce the whole of this confinement on one long playing record. But she was so well controlled, we did not feel it necessary to include the early phases of the first stage. We discussed her varying sensations and thoughts as the contractions became stronger. She is lying beautifully relaxed on her right side in a position that she's been taught. About to start another contraction.
Okay. So that's just a little trailer. It's quite short. It's a feature-length film, but I think just gives a little taste of the types of materials and the form of the film. And I think in this film, again, I was really interested in kind of unpacking the kind of history and lineages of different ideologies of kind of normative, successful childbirth and mothering. I think of it as really a film that's a kind of encyclopedia, maybe, of men's theories of women's bodies, but really just thinking kind of deeply and historically about what it has meant over time to manage childbirth, or kind of what are the different, ideas and national ideologies and social ideologies that have been placed on the birthing woman's body, and trying to really just think very historically, actually, about what that's looked like at different moments in time. And this is just one last project. I'm not sure how, do I have a couple more minutes?
Roughly,
okay. Maybe so I won't show any video from this, but I'll just briefly talk about this one more project called Maternity Test. That was kind of an outtake, actually, from all of the different processes. And like a lot of my film work is very process-based, where I'm just doing all different kinds of things, and then some of them become one project or another project or no project. But so this project was based on mothering web forums online, where women again come to anonymously share kind of traumatic and difficult experiences with childbirth and mothering. So for this project, I actually invited women to do teleprompter readings of kind of compilation of different anonymous posts about a very traumatic C-section birth. So kind of inviting a wide range of women to all collectively tell one story. That's this kind of anonymous internet forum story. And in this project, really, again, thinking about kind of collective voice, collective space, collective storytelling, and what it might mean to invite many people, including like, non-mothers, people with a different wide range of relationship to maternity, to embody one person's story about birth. So yeah, I think I'll just stop there, but I'm excited to kind of continue the conversation.
Thank you, Irene. I think it's very important to have this history that you have gathered together, this history of the hijacking of patriarchy by birth and women's bodies. So we're taking it back. Thanks. One more thing, Carmen, the question that is asked by your piece, what kind of struggles would move us beyond them? In Latin America, and it started in Argentina, very much inspired by Federici's work, the feminists invited the women's strike. That's become common in the past few years across Latin America, as a way to visibilize reproductive.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I didn't realize I was unmuted. Hopefully I wasn't, like, you weren't hearing any sounds. Yeah, I just want to briefly say that, I mean, speaking for myself, and I think a lot of feminists in the States are looking towards Latin and South America now as a kind of model for feminist organizing, as we've seen in Argentina, as we've seen in Colombia, et cetera. So, and certainly, in the international women's strikes.
Yeah. So there is a question in the audience to Julieta, comment about the parallel Julieta makes between artwork and care work, which is also happening in all of you guys' works, and the way in which there are activities that imply a kind of work, but that they're not socially recognized as work because they're not economically productive.
I would argue that it is not about things not being economically productive. It's about things supposedly carrying pleasure within them. And by which I mean, like, of course, there is pleasure in loving, right? Like, I don't love any of the things that I need to do for my son, like waking him up, getting him dressed, checking if he has lice, things like that. It's like horrendous stuff. But because I love him, there is, like, love means pleasure, means happiness, means I don't need retribution. As an artist, the fact that I give birth to this particular work should be its own reward, right? I could do it, how uncouth, how vulgar to ask for money, right? Like money it's only made once it enters the market, but I'm not doing it because of the market. I'm doing it because I sincerely believe in the beauty of this act of creation and its liberating potential and blah, blah, blah. And how is it going to be tarnished by money? What happens with that is that artists don't when work is sold and resold, the profit is not made by artists. If your work enters the secondary market, for example, right? Like none of the profit is made by an artist. And I mean, like, same happens, with regards to reproductive labor, care labor. Yeah, like there is just because you love, you are supposed to need no help. You are supposed to be able to perform. I mean, like the 10 hours that you spend on something become invisible. So I mean, like I find those things that it's not about them not being part of the economic market, because they both are. I mean, like, artistic production is, without it, there would be no art market, and care work, mothering work is is how we produce society. Like both have giant economic implications. It's just that they are supposed to be not tarnished by money. Like as if money was this kind of like thing that made them dirty. Yeah, like how dare you ask for compensation? Love should be enough.
And yet they cannot be sustained without money.
Yeah, no, but there is, I mean, like just that thing, you know, that money then becomes this dirty thing that if you ask for money, then you are not a real mother. Yeah, but I'm like, I'm sorry. Every hour that my child has not been with me, yeah, just say mi amor. Every hour that my son has not been with me, I have paid for. I know how much it costs, but so why? So there, I mean, like there is a market there, you know, like the people, like childminders and people that. So it's, I mean, like there is something. The equation has nothing to do with economies. It's rather trying to prevent the people that fuel those economies from reaping the benefits of them. And the construct is complicated, it's patriarchal, it's abusive, it's all kinds of horrible things.
Absolutely. Carmen and Irene, do you guys want to add to that?
I can, I mean, there's so much to say on this matter, and Julieta summed it up very nicely there in the end. Yeah, I think my version of feminism is incompatible with capitalism for this very reason, which is to say, yeah, that it breaks our backs and needs our billions of dollars of uncared work to sustain and thrive, you know, and like in this country, that's like a punchline, you know, it's like, I remember I went to go see this very famous comedian speak, you know, do her perform. And she like made a joke about like, you know, where's my 401k? Like, where's my retirement? You know, like, where's my fee? And it's like, it was like uproarious laughter, you know, like at such an idea. Is so deeply ingrained and inculcated in us, which is why, however mainstream, you know, more mainstream, the sort of Federici doctrine has become, it still feels completely out of reach and like almost ridiculous, I would say. That's how sort of deep this poison runs through our veins. So yeah, I would just, yeah, I guess I just am doing nothing but reiterating what Julieta has already said, but I feel that every day in a deep way.
Thanks. Irene?
Yeah, I don't know if I have more to add. I mean, I also agree. I feel all of that. And yeah, it does feel like in the US, maybe it's especially bad and broken. Even just beginning with the cost of childcare, I think is like just astronomically more than in other parts of the world and other countries. Yeah, I don't know, when I had a baby, my entire paycheck was in order to kind of continue to have a job and teach. I had a teaching job at the time. But yeah, every dollar that I made was given to someone else to look after my child so that I could go to work. So yeah, I think it's really complicated and none of it's working. But yeah, it's a symptom of capitalism, and it's part of much bigger systems and structures that are obviously also not working.
Yeah. I think that is shown extremely well in the Netflix series based on a memoir, Made. I don't know if you guys have seen it. Yeah, it's harrowing.
Yeah, it's quite good.
What's the name again?
Watch it. Made.
Come again?
Everyone watch it. Made.
Okay. Made. Oh yeah, I know which one it is. Yes.
Yeah. I have a question from the audience to all of you guys, and they're wondering about. She says, because you're taking up Federici, it's impossible not to put on the table the issue of Marxism and how Marxism conceives the relationship between productive and reproductive work. So what would be the play of Marxist theory, the role of that Marxist theory plays in your work, if it does at all.
It does. I mean, I'm not a historian, but my father's a sociologist and my brother is a labor historian, both of the Marxist variety. So I feel like I've absorbed some of this by osmosis. And I came to Federici through her book, probably her most well-known book, Caliban and the Witch, in which this is a very crude summation, but in which she sort of lays bare the differentiation between productive and reproductive labor, and sort of makes sense of that split, this being sort of instrumentalized by capitalism. Like capitalism, as we've been talking about, can't sort of exist or thrive or sustain if those kinds of labor are fused together. And so it's sort of, it's to the benefit, in other words, of the system that holds it up to pull them apart and to sort of understand them as different kinds of labor. So, you know, I am, so that's sort of like the basis of Federici's argument, you know, in understanding sort of her approach to Marxist feminism, but sort of it, she's kind of an interesting case because she's, you know, she's technically a philosopher, but she's doing historical analysis and economic analysis. And so lots of people get mad at her for different reasons. But for me, that sort of very basic idea resonates so deeply, and a kind of like light bulb went off in my head as to sort of my own economic value and sort of points of exchange, where like the sort of work that I had been doing that I thought of as kind of like capital W work was the work I was getting a paycheck for. And like the lowercase work was the work that I was doing at home, changing 1,000 diapers a day. And like you know, it's like we inculcate that violence for ourselves in such a deep way. I like try to unravel that every day in myself. Is sort of making sense in a Marxist capacity, sort of untethering worth from value.
Thanks. I think Elena wanted to jump in.
Hi there. Can you see me now? Yeah. No? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to keep with the conversation, and also say thank you to all. Thank you to being here, to Julieta. I think was also very important for us to bring to these conversations, those conversations that happened but didn't took like the form of an artwork in the exhibition, but were part of all these exchanges. And there was a pandemic in the middle of this, and there was work as well, carrying our kids and transform everything. And in relation to that, and of course to Irene and Carmen and you, Gardi, to be part of this conversation, because we think that it's also important to bring other voices to it, and the voices that are part of this giant kind of wave that it's happening right now around not only feminism, but also motherhood in relation with feminism. But like for us, one very important part of the discussion of the exhibition, or the discussion that of mothering in some kind of feminist perspective, is the problem of work. I really like the idea of the problem of work. That is one of the texts of Kathy Wicks, that she talks about the idea of the problem of work, and how this kind of capitalism, patriarchal idea, but also Marxist idea of production and reproduction labor, it doesn't allow us to think in forms of living today. No, like there is a problem with work in those terms, because like on the one hand, of course, as the title of the Carmen's work, that it's amazing, no? Like, why are these our only alternatives, and what kind of struggle will move us beyond them? Is that, no? Like, we need to move beyond these categories, because they are not helping us to realize the amount of work and labor and ways of doing that we are doing, and respect those ways of doing, and give them the credit and the responsibility and everything that it's involved, energy and love and care. Like I think that I think it's super interesting to try to think in other terms and to problematize work in order to to have some kind of freedom in our maternity. Otherwise, we're completely lost in this kind of riddle. And I think like the pandemic just like made it worse, isn't it? Like there was in the beginning of the pandemic, there was this paper in the New York Times saying like, during the pandemic, you can have a job or a kid, but you can have both. So I don't know how it was for you, but like for the first time in my life, I thought about quitting my job because I was not handling the whole thing, though I couldn't quit my job because I have to sustain my kid economically. So it is just like this, we're just like in this mess in which we need to rethink our ways of doing like, and in that way, like I think the work of Carmen was super important for the exhibition, but because you can see that archive of past struggles in the discussion of work. And also she was bringing this production of care within the archive or in the intervention of the archive with the kids. And also I'm really interested like in the Irene work, also in relation with the archives and this kind of massive archive in the production of ideology on which is the right way to give birth. And it's a form of controlling the body. And it's when you see the whole material, you can be part of a community, and it's amazing being in the exhibition. I'm so sorry you cannot have that experience, but being there and everybody's talking about their experiences and everybody's talking about like, oh, for me was that, and I thought I was like having like my decision, and it was my decision, and now I'm saying this is a program and it's part of an ideology. But anyway, I do think that I want to keep the conversation around these issues about archives, and if archives can give us some tools, let's say, to bring our ways of doing in other categories that are not productive and reproductive. So for anyone that wants to pick it up.
You know, can I say something? Like, I think there is something interesting about what kind of records exist and what kind of experiences have been documented. And like in thinking about what archives are there or what archives can come to be. I mean, I'm thinking, you know, of course, as I was pregnant, I read not too many because they drive me crazy, but like these books of, you know, what to expect when you are expecting and how to do. And a lot of it felt like, you know, none of the literature was catering to a situation like mine, which was like a single mom with no partner, because it was not a one-night stand, but it was like a kind of like a constructed decision. So it was like, tell your partner to hold your belly and bond to this. Like, I don't need, you know, it was like so much of it is devoted to the construction of the nuclear family. It's not just about, you know, like the kid, but it's a really peculiar society construct, not just the biological advice. And then there was also this thing about my body becoming a site for judgment, desire, and colonization, in the sense that I was told what I could eat, what I couldn't eat, how I had, I mean, like so many rules, yeah, like you cannot eat rice because it has arsenic. At some point, I just went into the most perverse obsessions of it, you know, like apples have arsenic. You should not eat apples or rice or bread. And I was like, what could expecting mothers eat? Like air, like nothing. But at the same time, you have to eat enough for two. And so it just becomes this incredibly strange thing. And then, of course, you have the mommy wars, where you have mothers that are just like incredibly perfect, kind of like pitted against each other. And I just kept thinking, okay, I mean, there are like these records and documented experience and anger and so on, but there is still no, and maybe it is because a lot of those documents are made by men, like in the films that we were watching, you know, like men describing the female experience, or men being gynecologists and things like that, and obstetricians. Yeah, it's like there is like such a mediation there, but the archive, like the way in which this experience can be archived and described is not there. It does not exist yet, I think. I mean, it's up to us and up to the ones that come after us.
But it's interesting that we have shifted from, you know, feminists needing to reject domestic labor and becoming mothers in order to be able to work or do productive work, and motherhood was sort of like shoved to the side, and they fought for taking back sexuality from a female point of view. And now it's like 40 years later, we're taking motherhood back. No?
Yeah, I think there's a thing. So when I discovered this huge body of 1970s work where it's like women sharing and talking and being ambivalent and being negative, and it's on screen and it's beautiful 16mm, like my response was actually rage of like, why did I not know this work? Why was it not shown to me? So, I think there's this huge challenge to kind of continue the continuous struggle of feminist organizing and thinking and moving forward, where like this work is so marginalized and so hidden, and it's just like erased over and over and over again, and you have to labor to find it. And like my students don't know this work, but I think that's a different kind of archives problem, is kind of what is saved and how much work is it to find it, and what yeah, and I think our work, I mean, I feel the same about my, that when this kind of work is marginalized or shown less or written about less, it kind of has it's becoming part of this archive of erasure, where it's like less available and harder to find for future women or mothers who need all of our work. And that's maybe a different framework for thinking about. But a lot of why I work with archives and work historically is this project of like trying to bring things back and salvage them and like hold them up again and amplify things that we need from the past that I think give us strength and give us power and give us kind of, because we're not making this stuff up, right? I think all of this stuff has been like the struggle for hundreds of years.
I think we could organize a mothers committee, like the committees in the 70s you came across in, women, creative women's committee, to have gatherings from time to time. That would be amazing.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Venga.
Hi everybody. I was listening to you and I'm looking at Julieta's back, back frame of it. And I was wondering, what if, especially Carmen and Irene are kind of looking back, but what about all the archives of, like science fiction, ecofeminism, kind of like mentioning at some point, and this kind of like perspective, like post-anthropocentric perspective, and kind of like like Ursula K. Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness, like where people are not gender, they only become gender when they have to reproduce, but they don't choose consciously who is going to reproduce and who's going to have labor. It's just something that happens without any conscience. And she has all these kind of like reflections around what are the implications of such an experiment, of not having gender. So is this something that has come in within your work, like maybe not only looking back, but it's kind of like, for me, it has been, it has made me easier to breathe in this experience, to get into contact into this kind of like ecofeminist science fiction perspectives. And I know, Julieta, you sometimes work with that, but I don't know if you've taken it into this kind of like motherhood perspective.
I've been trying not to make work about I made a decision to never stop working, also because I had to, and because I was afraid of the thing what happened. So I had a solo show 2 months after I gave birth, which, when I think about that, was absolutely insane. But so I never stopped working, and the work is not about my kid, it's for my kid. So I changed the way in which I describe the world, and I changed the materials that I use and things like that, because I don't talk about him, I talk for him. What changes for me in that sense is that, I mean, like the audience, you're like, who am I talking to? And I ask again, who am I talking to? Who am I talking to? Who is this for? Who is this for? And the answer keeps changing. And I mean, as I was saying, I've worked with science fiction for the best part of 20 years. And motherhood is asking me to take a moratorium in these images and concentrate myself in producing what is the present that corresponds to that future. That future is described, is great. But without a present that can sustain it, it's like religion, it's like it's like paradise. It's, it's like some kind of retribution of heaven and so on. So if I want those very aptly described futures to exist, I need to start looking at what I have in front of me and see the, like sowing the seeds. Because like nothing of what we have now could sustain those futures at the moment. So it's my temporality changed. This is what motherhood did to me, my temporality changed.
I have to go in just a few minutes to pick up my kids, so maybe I'll just chime in really briefly here. Just it seems very, on the mark for our conversation. You're mentioning Marge Piercy earlier, whom I've read and whom I've loved. I've read some Ursula Le Guin, but on the whole, science fiction has never. I've always wanted it to sort of like elevate, my political imagination in ways that I suppose it has, but not, in the way that I think maybe it does for other people. And for me, like there's something really important about being entrenched in history. And I think about, sort of how imagination can be projected in both directions, like towards some unnamed, unseeable future, and also like somehow in reverse or behind us. And so, I'm often asked as I look at archives, and, I feel very aligned with you on this, Irene. And like, as I look at these archives and I feel sort of the joy and the rage and everything in between, so much of that work is less for me about kind of like, I don't know, doing like building out some romantic projection, and more about like reaching backwards in time and the like sort of meeting imagination with imagination, which is to say the feminist project, particularly as it was being invented in the late 60s and early 70s, was so much, it was about a lot of things, and it was full of its own problematics. But I think what was so powerful about it for me was that there was a kind of big imagination around what the new structures could be, even like consciousness raising as a kind of, that was an evolved form, but also an invented form. And that's just to say, like, for me, it's not that science fiction doesn't hold, it's just that, there's something for me about projecting backwards or imagining backwards that's a little bit hard to describe. With that, I have to go. I'm so sorry to cut and run.
I think we can close on that note. Raising consciousness and structures, looking at the past and grounded on the present toward the future. No, something like that.
That's science fiction, time travel.
Yeah, right, true.
So I should remind the audience that there is a Maggie Nelson conference at 4:00. So do tune in, and well, thank you, Irene, Carmen, and Julieta. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Round Carmen.